Hello everyone. Today we are discussing part B of uh, Forestry paper 1 of 2021 Indian Forest Service mains examination. So basically Forestry Optional we are continuing to discuss this part B of paper 1. Okay. Again, this section has 4 questions, out of which one is compulsory, that is question number 5. It has 5 sub questions, 8 markers, and from the rest of the 3 you have to choose minimum 1 and maximum 2. In my opinion, this particular section was tougher than section A, because section A had lot of direct questions, answer to which were directly available in standard books. Even Manikandan Prabhu has most of the answers right there. I mean, you don't even have to look beyond it. But in this section, it is much more conceptual and application oriented. So there are concepts which you need to know, and based on that concept you have to answer applied questions here, as we shall see. So it's not easy to find answer to these questions readily, but so I would again advise, like I did in the last lecture, that try to choose 2 questions from section A and 1 from B, because those questions are highly technical and answer to which are actually very easily available in standard books. And 2, again one of the toppers told that uh, section A is much more technical and forestry oriented, and it's thus marks fetching. This is generally more generalistic, which you can answer based on CSE knowledge, but to write very good answers, it's not easy here as well. Okay, so let's begin. Look at question number 1. You are simply asked to write what are the impacts of COVID-19 on environment and biodiversity. So this question you can answer based on your CSE knowledge or general reading. COVID-19, has been one of the biggest uh, happenings of this century, we should say. So lot of lot of things have been written about it and discussed about it. So here we are asked for 8 marks. What are the impacts? Basically, the only thing to remember here is that the, both positive and negative impacts are to be written here. Introduction, you can do anything. I mean, uh, substantial impact has happened on environment and biodiversity. That can be a general introduction, 2-liners. And see, majorly impact has been positive because all the activities were stopped, and because of that pollution reduced, and human activities and human induced negative implications on environment and wildlife both reduced substantially. So majorly impacts are negative. So how are you going to substantiate your argument? You have to give some data. So here I have given you data from SAFAR, as you know, System of Air Quality and Weather Forecasting and Research. This is Government of India initiative. For prelim, you can tell me that which ministry publishes this data. Okay. So yeah, basically it reduced air pollution due to lockdowns. Exploitation of wildlife resources may have reduced in protected areas. According to SAFAR, COVID-19 led to drop in PM 2.5 by 30% in Delhi. See, one data set, if you know, great. I mean, it substantiates your answer. Then nitrogen dioxide drastically reduced 40%. Water quality in rivers. We don't just stick to air pollution, include all kinds of pollution like water pollution, river pollution, or soil pollution, air pollution. Even you can include noise pollution, which I have not included. So noise pollution also reduced. So it would be better for birds, etc. In especially in urban areas. So water quality in Ganga and Yamuna improved. Then nature of wildlife replenished itself. That we have seen everywhere. I mean, it was one of the biggest lessons of this pandemic, that nature can heal itself. So Bombay Natural History Society said that there has been 20%, 25% increase in flamingo migration. And I myself have visited, observed flamingos, greater flamingos, not too long ago. Beautiful birds. But at the same time, you have to mention some negative implications as well. For instance, when the lockdowns happened, the entire government machinery was focused on controlling pandemic. So naturally, uh, whatever manpower you could divert to wildlife conservation, that automatically reduced. So there was neglect or less control on wildlife resources. So automatically, many wild element species were killed by locals for consumptions or delicacies, simply because there was no supervision. Then another thing, pandemic was such a big thing that people began resorting to any kinds of remedies. So in traditional medicines, or in the name of traditional medicines, all kinds of animals were killed. So uh, there was efforts to get treated by for of these chronic diseases by traditional healer. Concoctions were made from parts of wild animals as well, and some forest trees. So exploitation, which trees are they rare or threatened? No uh, importance was given to that, because there was no control, or there was less control there. Then illegal harvest of rhinoceros increased because of high demand for its horns for COVID-19 treatment in Chinese medicine. As you know, rhino horns are always in high demands, and rhino poaching is a real problem, especially in state of Assam. So traditional Chinese medicine, rhino horns are considered highly beneficial. But in reality, they are, just keratin. So that was there. Poverty was increased because, reverse migrations happened, and so when reverse migration happens to rural areas or the villages close to, say, forest, there is increased pressure on local forest resources or natural resources in general. So that happened. Then ecotourism is one of the effective ways to balance economic, ecological, and local livelihood interests. So tourism stopped completely. So there was no revenue coming in, which was being used for local livelihood as well as protection of local ecosystems. But when that revenue stopped, local naturally had to resort to their old methods, which was exploitation of forests or local ecosystems. So again, that was negative. Loss of some skilled staff as well, you can say. And finally, we have examples that animals also suffered from this COVID-19 virus. So there, lions in Gir, uh, COVID was detected in these species as well. Okay, 1 second. Okay. So basically, questions was very easy. You can write lot of points here, but writing different points in both positives and negatives was important here. And if you want, you can uh, further divide this question into, right, positive negative impacts on environment and positive negative impacts on biodiversity. So you can answer it in 4 parts, but I thought there are quite similar points, so it can be clubbed, and effectively we can write 6 6 12 points, 8 markers. You can't expect more than that. That is the thing. And you don't have a lot of time as well. You have hardly 7 minutes to write this 8 marker. You have 2 pages for it. Okay, second question again. uh, Question on forest, joint forest management. Okay, how do the ownership right of forest influence success of joint forest management? As again, what would we start with? We can define a joint forest management. It's the simplest way to do it. Joint forest management in bracket JFM. So now we can write JFM everywhere. Is partnership wherein both local communities and forest departments are involved in managing the forest. Forest department usually acts as a facilitator here to really empower local communities. Right. Under JFM, village communities are entrusted with responsibilities to protect and manage nearby forest. See, under JFM, these communities have to organize themselves in various committees like forest protection committees, village forest committees, conservation and development societies, etc., where there is representation of various local groups as well as women and men both. So basically, elite capture is uh, avoided as far as possible, but it happens anyway. In return of their services to forest, these communities get benefit of using minor non-timber forest produced. As a result, forest can be conserved in a sustainable manner. So what are these ownership right under JFM? So basically community ownership ownership over land, over non-timber forest produced, and minor water bodies, etc. So these are the ownership right. That could be your transitioning statements. And how is that related to success of these JFM operations? See, success and failure, you can talk in terms of what are the objectives of JFM. Basically, with JFM, we want to conserve the forest sustainably. So, how do these ownership right help us achieve that? That is the question. Basically, ownership makes them active participant. Otherwise, they are passive participant, and we have seen this in terms of farming as well. When there is no ownership, farmer is not incentivized to work. We have seen that in our history, like in permanent settlement system. We have seen that in countries like USSR as well. So ownership is very important in that context. It makes locals as active stakeholders, so that they protect forest areas in order to prevent lot of activities. So they don't graze in without any control. So sustainable grazing is conducted there. They assist in preventing illegal activities by outsider. So illegal felling, as we have seen red sanders and etc. Illegal felling is stopped. Uh, then illegal mining is stopped. Fighting of forest fires, etc. Control of illicit felling, that we have already covered. And basically, locals are most appropriately situated to control all these things, because forest department, uh, see, there is one forest guard in the beat area, and for him it is not actually possible to be everywhere all the time, but locals are always there. So locals are best situated to detect any encroachments or any illegal activities and respond to it as well, and they can inform forest department very quickly when there is trust, and that is where JFM committees comes in. Okay. And ownership right is facilitator behind all that. If there is no ownership right, they are not active participants. Further, haphazard lopping is reduced, fuel wood extraction is happening systematically, other alternatives are used for to fuel wood, then practice of rotational grazing is happening. So uh, uh, rotational grazing is basically you don't graze in one area continuously, you try to graze in different areas, so that grazing is happening sustainably. So that can happen. Basically, when there is community ownership, when they are active participant, they do all these things. If there is no ownership with them, if they are not active participant in all this, they have no incentive to do any of this. Then they will resort to illegal lopping, then they resort to fuel wood, they will get whatever tree is best situated or for them as fuel wood. They won't go far away, they won't try to control any illegal lopping or mining, etc. They would rather be taking some kinds of illegal commissions or work as labor there. So that happens, but with ownership all that is avoided. JFM basically assures local people certain proportion of the intermediate and final harvest from forest lands that is going to accrue to them. So basically, if we are getting some income from the forest with ownership, they local communities are assured of some income, maybe partial income or full income, depending on what kind of income it is. So if that is assured to them, that is helping them in lean periods when agriculture is activities are not conducted. So if they have that kind of economic stability and support, then they don't need to go for these illegal activities, and they rather protect their forest, because their lives are already dependent and interwoven with forests. So they have incentive to do that. And finally, traditional experience of tribals is also used in uh, sustainably managing forest. When they have ownership, they have voice. When they have voice, their traditional practices are utilized in managing forest sustainably. And we have seen this in various communities, like Bishnoi community of Rajasthan is good example of that. These rights are provided gainful employment during lean period and supplementary income from agriculture and wage labor, that is there. And why is that important? Because Timber production is a long-term endeavor, and in many areas, timber harvesting may not be ecologically desirable, which is what locals resort to when there is no ownership rights. So focus changes from selfish motives to community benefits, and sense of commitment and discipline is developed. That could be your conclusion. Fine. I hope that is clear. Question was easy, but again you have to really understand why ownership is such an important thing in JFM to write good quality points. Okay, let's go to next question. It is on watershed management. How can watershed management enhance and promote sustainable integrated water resource management? Now the thing to note here is that they are not talking about just water management but water resource management. Okay, so we have to talk about ultimately water resources and how they are managed better. Okay, fine. Introduction, you just have to define watershed management. Actions taken within boundaries of watershed towards optimal and sustainable development of land, water and plant resources to meet needs of the people. Simple definition of watershed management. Any kind of management, this is what we are doing. We are trying to balance ecosystems with our human needs. Optimal sustainable development of land, water, plant resources on that watershed towards meeting needs of the people as well as protecting watershed functioning. So basically, I have tried to include what this watershed management includes. I am writing what it includes first because I want to connect all these things to how watershed management is used to sustainably and in an integrated manner manage water resources in the watershed. That's why if I write what it all includes, and it is very easy for me to write how it helps because that is the question. So here I have enlisted the points. Alternatively, you can draw sun diagram. So basically, watershed management includes, and you can write these points. In short, I have written it full sentences. If you draw sun diagram, you don't need full sentences. You can just write keywords there. Okay. So what does watershed management includes? It includes protection and enhancing natural resources. Of course, that could be your one keyword. Resource of watershed, sustain production of fuel, fodder, timber or soil etc. from watershed. So sustainable uh, production should be there of all these natural resources. Then controlling soil erosion by reducing speed of water flowing on the watershed. That's the basic principle of watershed management. We want to reduce speed of water using contour bunds and check dams etc. Okay, or agroforestry systems as well. Then we want to enhance groundwater recharge with rainwater harvesting and diversion of runoff water to storage structure. So basically, we want to build small streams, check dams, so that we want to divert whatever water is flowing on the watershed to our resources or water resources or storage structures. That's what the question is about. That is what we are doing in watershed management. Ensure economic stability of locals and safety of ecosystem at the same time. Regulating over exploitation of resources with involvement of locals in management. That is also part of watershed management, watershed governance here what we are talking about. Okay. So in this light, watershed management promotes water resource management in multiple ways. Now what are these ways? This is basically the answer. You can expand a bit on this, but basically this is crux of the answer. If you reduce upper part by drawing sun diagram, you can expand a bit on these things. I have just mentioned the point here. Covering of point is more important, and at the end of the day, this is 8 marker, so you don't have a lot of time and space as well. 7 minutes you have. If you cover all these points, I would say good enough. So how it helps in managing water resources? Basically, it augments water resources because you can write because we are diverting all surface water to our storage structures, because we are trying to recharge groundwater, and from there this augmentation of water resources is happening. Then recharge of water level resources, that is why we are reducing speed of water flowing on the watershed. Then proper storage, quality of water, sustainable usage of water, all these things related to how we use sustainably and integrated way water resources in the watershed. In usage, it is not just about use, it is about augmentation of resources, it is about storage of those water resources, it is about ensuring quality of those water resources, it is about usage of those water resources, and it is about governance of those water resources. In all these things, watershed management is crucial because it includes all the above things. That is our answer. Ensuring quality of water resources. Okay. Let's go to question number 5D. 1 second. Okay, this is about soil organic matter decomposition. Question says, how does soil organic matter decomposition influence forest productivity? So, which concepts are here? You are supposed to know what is soil organic matter here, what is its decomposition, and what is influence on forest productivity. So, you have to connect all these concepts. That is what makes it a little bit difficult question, I would say, compared to question number ABC. Fine. So, in answer, organic material gets added in soil due to addition of plant tissues and animals as well. Plant tissues like leaves, roots, grasses, crop residue. These are the primary constituents or primary sources for organic matter, and there are animal waste and animal dead bodies as well. These are not as big in volume compared to plant sources. So, these are sources, and soil organic material are attacked by the soil organisms like bacteria and fungi, etc., and they cause their decomposition. Now, what happens is a portion of this decomposed organic matter, total soil organic matter, is active and portion is passive. This active is actually 10 to 20%, and it is most easily decomposed by soil organisms. That is why it is called active. Because it is most easily decomposed, this is much more important, and that decomposition is what determines activity or not, soil activity, soil organic activity. So this fraction is replenished primarily by addition of organic matter. What is it? The crop residues, crop covers, roots, and etc. Manures, composts, and soil organisms, which make up to another 10 to 20% of soil organic matter, decompose this active organic matter, and upon death, these organisms release their nutrients to plants as well. So, what are the components? This is active component of soil organic matter. There are these soil organisms, and remaining organic matter is humus, as we say. Now, humus is very important. However, it does not produce any nutrients per se, but it provides cation exchange sites which holds nutrients for the soil and thus maintain their availability to plants. They don't provide nutrition to plants, but they provide space to hold nutrients. In this light, organic matter decomposition directly influences forest productivity. Now remember, this is the question, okay? How does it influence? So this is how. There is active part of this organic matter, then there is soil organisms, and then there is humus. And how do they influence? That we have mentioned here. Organic matter amendments to soil decompose at different rates, and this affects how quickly nutrients become available to crops. That's where active and humus part comes in. Okay, fine. And then you know that forest soils are unique in this context because litter is getting continuously added to forest soils, and there is O layer, O horizon in forest soils that is unique there of loosely and partly decayed organic matter. And where can we see this? More the organic matter, better the productivity. Evergreen forest, mangrove forest have high organic matter and high organic matter decomposition as well. So they are highly productive. On the other hand, thorn forest or saline soil, they are low organic matter, so there is low productivity. A bit difficult question because you need to know bit nitty-gritties of this. Okay, next question. Okay. It is about agroforestry. Question is, how do agroforestry woody perennials protect understory crop? Now, this is actually an easy question. Question woody perennials etc. is given there, but basic question is, how does this overstory protect understory crops? Woody perennials are basically woody plants, so trees which are perennial, and how are they protecting understory? So how overstory protects understory? That is the question. It's very easy question. Directly answer is there in many standard books. But since it is question is about agroforestry woody perennials, we will introduce what are these agroforestry woody perennials in introduction itself. In agroforestry, these are basically agro-silvopastoral systems wherein woody perennials are produced along with annuals and pastures. So since this is agro-silvi pastoral system, so there are woody perennials, then there are pastorals, and there are annual agricultural crops. All of them are produced together. So in standard books, we have two kinds of this woody perennial systems, that are home gardens or woody hedgerows. Okay, home gardens, as you know, there are multi-story gardens in many of the high rainfall areas like western coast of Maharashtra, like in Ratnagiri. There are these home gardens you can visit, beautifully maintained. And then there are woody hedgerows, where these trees are taken for uh, foraging or for browsing etc., which help in which are leguminous trees are preferred here, which help in improving soil productivity as well. So basically these are two types of woody perennials that just we have to mention in introduction, because question is regarding that. But how do they protect understory? So basically, how would they protect from adverse climate? So it would upper canopy would intercept the sunlight and protect understory from scorching sunlight or scorching heat. It would protect from frost. It would protect from wind, because wind velocity they will reduce. It will protect from cold and hot winds as well. It would protect from heavy rainfall and like cyclones etc. It would protect from high temperature. Soil erosion will be controlled because of binding of soil. This woody overstory will have deeper growths, deeper roots, and so they will bind soil. So in this way, understory would be protected. And with woody perennials forming upper story, we can take shade bearer or shade demander crops in its shade as understory. A better survival of sensitive seedlings and understory protection. So in basically that's what we do in our uniform shelter wood systems as well, wherein in shade of upper story, understory is protected, and uh, better survival of sensitive seedlings is ensured. And choice of woody species, so any woody species you can mention, but these are basically Mangifera indica, Pseudium gujava, Azadirecta indica, Cocos nucifera. These are the popular woody perennials that are taken in case of home gardens or woody hedgerows. Especially home garden, these are very popular in Konkan region, as I said, in Ratnagiri. Mangifera indica, Cocos nucifera, these are the popular species in woody perennial systems. Now let's come to question number 6. This was a full toss. So many things to write. You are only limited by time and your imagination, because this is a very general question. I mean, explain the role of trees and forest in environmental conservation. You can write essays on it. People have it. You can write books on it, and I mean, but you have to remember that this is a 15 marker, and you are limited by time and space. So you have to diversify your answer. That is very important in my opinion here. You cannot get stuck on one point and write much and go on and on about it, ignoring other points. And because of that, I would recommend drawing of diagrams. I have drawn some diagrams which I will explain you, but in this question, that was I think important to cover many things in that limited space and limited time, because question itself is not difficult, it is in fact very easy, and that is the challenge here. So how would we introduce? Basically, we will define environmental conservation. Environmental conservation is practice of protecting, managing and improving the natural ecosystems to prevent it from collapsing as a result of human activities. Why we want to consume? Because of human activities. And what does conservation include? It includes protection, it includes management of ecosystems, and it includes improving existing ecosystems or degraded ecosystems as well. That is what conservation is all about. PMI, protection, management, improvement. That is what we have written in introduction. It includes conserving essential components of ecosystem as well as reducing impacts of human-induced changes. In both these aspects, forests and trees perform crucial role. That is our connecting statement. We want to connect introduction to our main body of the answer. So basically, we are telling the examiner that these are the two components around which I will be writing answers. So basically, how does forest reduce impact of human induced changes, and how does forest conserves essential components of ecosystems. So these are the two aspects around which our answer will go. So basically, again, what does forest do to conserve water or water cycle? So forest has crucial role in maintaining water cycle. Now I have drawn the diagram. Here I have just mentioned all the important points, but okay. So this is what water cycle is. So forest as shown by trees. So forest will intercept rainfall, okay, and the stem flow will be there. There will be surface runoff. There will be soil evaporation. There will be soil percolation, soil filtration, evapotranspiration, and evaporation. So this evaporation will go here. Evapotranspiration will go. Soil evaporation will go, and entire thing will be coming down as rainfall, which will be again intercepted by trees and forest. Stem flow will be there, surface flow, and filtration, purification of water will be there. So this is the entire water cycle that forests have crucial role to play in. And furthermore, what happens is uh, forest or trees take lots and lots of water from the soil, but they don't use that soil. Almost 99% of that water that trees absorb, they just evaporate. But all of that cannot go up. So most of the water that they evaporate gets stored in atmosphere of forest. So if you ever visit forest, it is always cool and little damp, because lot of water is stored in this atmosphere, and that is one of the important water sources on earth. Okay, and uh, if you read about why our sea levels are increasing, there are multiple reasons, out of which one is of course iceberg melting. Second is about sources on earth like lakes and rivers, they are drying up. Third is about expansion of water that is in the oceans because of temperature rise. And fourth is deforestation. Because of deforestation, this important source of storage of water, the forest atmosphere, is getting destroyed, and that is why sea level is increasing. Okay, that is side question, that is not part of our question. I am just giving you extra information. But this water cycle diagram, if you draw, you can get good marks, and don't have to write lot of things about water after this. You just have to mention all these things, and in water cycle, forests have important role to play. Okay, the next is maintaining carbon oxygen balance and carbon sequestration. That is pretty much clear. Forest, we know that forests store a lot of carbon, and we that is why uh, afforestation or building 2.5 to 3 gigaton of storages in terms of forest is important part of our INDCs, right? And our national forest policy also aims at having 33% as forested land. So carbon sequestration, carbon dioxide oxygen balance, that maintenance, their forest plays important role. Next is soil conservation. So how? Reducing runoff, water that is flowing, forest or trees reduce the pace of water, improve the that is recharge of groundwater. Then forest uses lot of water and stores it. Then soil pollution that is filtered by forest or trees. Nutrient recycling, binding of soil. Deep rooted trees are even take nutrition from withering of rocks and soil formation. Again, let me go to another diagram. I have already drawn this so that it becomes easy. Basically, if the water is coming, trees will reduce its space and soil erosion will be controlled, and soil productivity will be improved by litter fall and nutrition absorption. Okay, so litter will fall from this tree as well. If this is a small tree, this is a big tree. Big tree will have deep roots. So small tree can only take nutrients from this area, so from this litter, and whatever nutrition that get lost in the soil, that it can't take. But if in the forest, there are lots of different kinds of tree, and some trees can go really deep in terms of their roots. So these deep roots can take nutrition from withered rocks as well and soils as well as litter of own and litter of this. So nutrition recycling is happening due to forests. Okay. Finally, forest develop forest control temperature and form favorable microclimate as well. How that happens? So this is, let's say, forest. So forest will reduce wind velocity, forest will intercept sunrays. This is an exhaustive diagram. So all things that forests do can be captured in one diagram. Sunrise will be intercepted, rainfall will be intercepted. So loss of heat will be reduced because heat can't go up and there is a lot of water here. Storage of water, as I mentioned. Then it will bind soils. So in this way, it will create its entire different microclimate, which is favorable for forest growth and functioning of ecosystems. Okay, if you draw this diagram, you don't have to explain a lot. Fine. Another point, wildlife protection. So they provide habitat and food for wildlife. Then biodiversity conservation, of course. Then pollution control. Forests are, or forests and trees are hearts and lungs of the ecosystems. Hearts are there because carbon dioxide oxygen balance, but lungs as well because they filter a lot of pollutants. Then forests do disaster control, climate adaptation and mitigation. So all these things, disaster control, how they can dissipate a lot of cyclonic energy. For example, mangrove forest you can take. Cyclonic energy is dissipated, tsunami energy is dissipated, and thunderstorm control can happen. Lightning, etc., that can be controlled using trees. So see, this was a big question, actually simple question, but there was lot of things to write and you have to stick to space and time. That was the real challenge. One second. Okay. Let's come to next question. Discuss the problems of commons in social forestry and suggest some effective strategies to overcome these problems. Again, this is very conceptual oriented question. You first need to know what are the commons in social forestry. One, then you can discuss the problems associated with those commons, and then you can come to effective strategies. See, but if you don't know what these commons means, then this is not general question about what are the problems in social forestry. This is about problems of commons in social forestry. Okay, so this is a specific question which asks you to know a lot of things about uh, conceptual clarity about commons. Okay, so as we always do, we will start with definition. You can define social forestry and then define for commons as well, because this is a 15 marker and you have 4 pages to write. I mean, we can do that. Basically, social forestry is practice of forestry outside forest area for the benefit of rural and urban communities. You can say that this includes a lot of things like farm forestry, shelter belts, wind belts, recreational forestry, extension forestry, community lands and wasteland planting, etc. And you can also mention that it has many benefits. uh, I have mentioned some benefits. You can draw some diagrams here if you don't want to waste 4 or 5 lines for uh, writing this. So what are the benefits? You all know, like protection of provision of forest produce, that thereby protection of forest, additional income, rural employment, protection of agriculture produce against harsh climates, less pressure on forest, erosion control, water cycle, pollution, protection of roads, etc., railways, roads, with extension planting, extension or avenue planting, etc. Now we come to forest commons or common pool of resources. Now, what is this? So, joint ownership, management, and use of forest and tree resources by designated group of users. This is very, very important in concept of forest commons. Often, all or part of a community is known as commons or common pool of resources. So, basically, when there is when there is some forest resource that is to be used by this designated group of users. So, understand this conceptual difference. In general, when we talk about common resource, we mean open access resource. Basically, for example, a lake. Anybody can go to lake. Anybody can do fishing there. Anybody can use water there. So this is not a that. This is a common resource that is to be used by a designated group of people. This is not open access resource. That is a difference with commons and open access resource. The resources cannot be sold, cannot be mortgaged, leased, or bequeathed to anybody outside the group. So that this resource is to be used only within the group, only by the group of people that is already designated or enlisted or registered, or they are part of the local community. Only by them these resources can be used. Now, and with this understanding, what are the problems of the commons? If you know, good. If you don't, think of it, you can rationally think about problems. But again, for that, you need to know what this concept is. Okay. And one thing I would like to highlight, the popular tragedy of commons problem is not applicable here. That is applicable for open access resources. So, for instance, when everybody has access to the common resource, it will be exploited so much so that it is unsustainable. Other people can't use it anymore. So basically, you can take example of a lake. If there are 10 fishes in the lake and only 5 can be sustainably harvested daily, then and it is open access resource, then 5 people will come and each will try to exploit maximum. Each will exploit 2, and that is it. The resource is exhausted. That is tragedy of commons. When there is common resource, when there is no ownership, when resource is accessible to everybody, then nobody takes responsibility to sustainably protect or manage it. But that is not this problem of this commons. This is commons, which is common resources, which is to be used only by designated group of people and not by everybody. This is not open access resource. This is a common resource. That is different here. So what could be problem? There is usually, who are these designated users? It is erroneous to assume that local user group represents all the community inhabitants. So many times smaller groups are excluded from the use of common resources when they are designated. Only the local user group gets prominent or dominant or only share of this common resource when there are other dependents or other local community inhabitants as well. What could be another problem? Village elite capture. That is the problem everywhere. When you talk about local governance as well, in PRIs we study that elite capturing by of local bodies or PISA Act we study. PISA, in PISA Act as well, this is one of the criticisms of PISA, that there is local elite capture or capturing by dominant people that are there locally. That is what happens in this kind of resources as well. For example, there can be a project of tree planting on common which may turn out to be a move by village elite to seize the common land by planting trees on it. So they just want to seize the land. They don't want anybody else use that land. For example, if there is a common pasture which nomadic tribes and herders use, and it is a common. So village elite will just plant trees, destroy the pasture because they want to grab that land. Okay. In social forestry system on common property, if the decision makers are all male, women's uses of forestry and tree products may not be incorporated into management plans. That is again a very common problem in PRIs as well. So if you look at it, you can take any problem of our local governance and you can superimpose it using forestry concept. You just add a little bit flavor of your forestry and you get the answer. So male female problem is there in the local bodies as well. Even if there is 33% reservation for women in local bodies, there is practice of pati sarpanch, that it's quite prevalent across India. That can happen here as well. So women's rights are getting ignored if all the decision makers are male. Another things which I already mentioned, nomadic pastoralists who have seasonal unfructuary rights, for example, to graze their animals on a forest common, are frequently overlooked when social forestry project introduces new management system and they lose access to their common resource. So these are the basic problems of commons. Now, okay, this is what wrong answer will look like. When you don't know what the commons mean in social forestry, if you interpret the question as what are the common problems in forestry, this is what one will write, that problem of tragedy of commons. This is not tragedy of commons problem, which as I have already explained to you. This is wrong. This is not a problem of commons here. Okay, please don't write it. And other problems in social forestry which are not asked, but I'm just telling you what you should not write in this. So social forestry, so community plantation, roadside plantation, tragedies of common, you can see that. Then the issue of farm forestry you can write, because farm forestry is very much part of social forestry. Then farm forestry ke problems and extension problems of extension forestry, community forestry, urban forestry. These are all problems in social forestry, but these are not problems of commons in social forestry, because commons is a very different concept in social forestry. Now, what are the strategies to overcome? So again, as I said, if you look at this commons as uh, similar to our issues in our local bodies, you can say that solutions would be similar to what our solutions are for our local bodies. What are they? Local participation in governance, fair representation of all sections, clearly defined user group is an important component of effective common property regime, including seasonal pastoralist communities. This is the most crucial point, clearly defined user group, because we have seen that designated group can only use these common resources, and clearly defined user group is an important component thus of effective commons property regime. Then again, forest department and higher PRI authorities, they should prevent elite capture. That is what we talk about in PRIs as well. Then empowering locals in managing commons, and it should not be looked at as a loss of power by state forest department. So if what happens is, state forest department will try to overtake the powers of these common resources unto themselves, because the locals are quite unaware, uneducated, untrained. But it should not be looked like that. or it should not be look like they are trying to exercise our powers. Rather, uh, forest department should prevent elite capture on their behalf. Training and capacity building, auditing by state government to ensure that proper functioning and sustainable usage of common is happening. So basically, states should ensure that or overlook that local authorities are properly functioning according to how they are mandated. These resources are not unsustainably exploited, and uh, uh, locals are trained, educated, skilled enough to govern those common pool of resources. And it should happen annually and not be used as a tool to interfere in common property regimes. So, and conclusion, you can say that forest common is an important part of social forestry. For sustainable forest management, all stakeholders have crucial roles to play. And you can even say that if state is doing that, central government should ensure that states are not interfering. Okay, let's go to next question. Question number 6C. Simple question: how does agroforestry promote sustainable livelihood of marginal farmers? As always, we'll define what agroforestry is, then we will give some data about marginal farmers, and then we will say how do they promote sustainable livelihood. That is a very simple and straightforward question. You don't need any forestry knowledge to write this. You can write it based on our civils knowledge as well. And that is why some say that this section, this particular section, uh, because it is slightly general in nature, you may want to write more questions from section A, wherein you can get more marks, because that is technical in nature. Because see, this question, everybody will write this. I mean, there is no very difficult or technical stuff here, except for the commons question where you need to know the concept. Here you don't. I mean, you can write it in very general terms, okay, but your examples will make difference here. If you know any case studies, etc., that will create positive impact. Now, what is agroforestry? Agroforestry is a sustainable land use system that maintains increased yield, that will ensure that yield increases, that includes growing together of crops as well as trees, and it may or may not include livestock farming together with it. So basically, trees and for crops, agriculture crops are grown together or alternatively. So there are for agroforestry system wherein you'll grow crops 1 year, then you'll plant trees there for certain number of regeneration period, then you'll again grow crops, or you can do alley cropping. You grow trees around uh, or trees in uh, lines, and in between alleys between those tree lines you can grow crops. Like Tonga system is there, alley cropping is there. That can be one of the agroforestry systems as well. So trees and crops, that is what I have written. It is highly effective toward ensuring sustainable livelihood of marginal farmers, who constitute marginal and small farmers are 86%. I knew that data, that's why I mentioned that. If you know how many of these small and marginal are marginal farmers, you can mention that data, that would be better. But if you don't, write that small and marginal farmers who constitute 86% of total farmers. So how do they ensure sustainable living with? These are the things that do. There is nothing to explain much here. Agroforestry system lead to income diversification. When if crop fails, you have insurance in terms of forest or tree income. Then usually we have seen that 1.6 to 1.7 times more income is happening with agroforestry system. This is in line with our traditional knowledge. You can plant local trees there, then trees can lead to nitrogen fixation. It thereby alleviates basic vulnerabilities of marginal farmers. So that's why sustainable living is uh, promoted. What are these basic vulnerabilities? Dependence of monsoon, dependence of monoculture, meager income, indebtedness due to high input cost, etc. See, there is nothing much to explain here. If you can think of any more points, mention in the comment section and I will add them here. Now let's come to question number 7. Again, not a very easy question, but something as budding forest officer you should know. There are multiple questions involved here, so it is slightly easy to write as we have mentioned, or at least you can get part marking very easily. What is the relationship between air pollutants and climate change? So question number 1 is about what is the relationship? How does forest vegetation abate the different types of pollutants? So you need to tell how and not why. 3. Describe Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981. Question number 3 in relationship to for pollution management. And 4. Suggest names of suitable plant species. So for 15 markers there are 4 questions. You don't have a lot of time to write all about all these things in very details, but there's lots and lots of scope to write about many of these things. And I would say that this is an easy question 1, this is an easy question 2, this is an easy question 3. Finally, suitable species is something you may not know if you have not learned them, but you can venture a guess, like which trees we plant usually in urban areas to abate pollutants. Those trees, if you can mention, that would be good enough in my opinion. But yeah, again, there are researches and specific species that are more uh, useful for capturing pollutants than others, and we will see about them. Okay. So here there is not a lot of scope to write introduction, because we have to write 4 questions in 15 marker, 4 pages. Only 1 page you at the max you have for one page, one sub question. So in introduction, you can directly mention that pollutants and climate change have complex relationship. And what kind of complex relationship there is there? Yes, please don't be unidimensional, because this is the complex relationship. We have seen some pollutants, they exacerbate climate change. There are some pollutants who reduce impact of climate change. There are some climate change, and at the same time climate change will lead to more pollutants. See, so this is not unidimensional relation, this is a bidirectional relationship, and that direction also is not only in one way. So some pollutants will actually lead to reduction in climate change impact, which is a phenomenon known as global dimming, which is opposite of global warming. So that why I've mentioned. For example, some pollutants will exacerbate climate change. So ozone is a climate warming gas. Black carbon is a particulate pollutant from combustion, which contributes to warming of earth. As you know, black carbon is black, so it will lead to warming of earth. Then these pollutants will be circulated by air currents. They will reach polar area and they will uh, darken the ice. When these pollutants darken the ice, ability of ice to reflect incoming sun rays will reduce, and ice will be heated more. When ice will be heated, snow will melt, sea level will rise. If snow melts, the ground beneath the snow will be exposed, which will lead to more capturing of ice of heat in terms of sunlight, because ice is very highly reflective of sunlight. Albedo of ice is very high. So this way it creates vicious cycle of warming due to this pollutant. So this some pollutants will exacerbate climate change. On the other hand, some pollutants will negate the impact of climate change, which is what we know as global dimming impact. So what happens is, if there is particulate matter in the atmosphere, they will actually reflect away incoming sun rays. They will not let those sun rays reach the earth, and because of that, insolation will reduce, and temperature of earth will not rise as much as it should. So this phenomena is acting together with global warming, and it is actually reducing impact of global warming to some extent. So if global dimming was not there, global warming would be much more severe. And that is why when we are trying to reduce impacts of global warming, at the same time we have to reduce our pollution, like particulate matter pollution, so that we have to reduce them together. It is, if we only reduce pollution, then actually global warming will exacerbate. That is what global dimming phenomena tells us. So you can mention about global dimming. And thirdly, climate change may lead to more pollutants like ozone. You know how ozone is created. Ozone is created when uh, organic sol in the heat in urban areas, when pollutants combine, ozone is created with VOCs, volatile organic compounds. That's how ozone is created. So climate change may lead to more pollutants. Okay, so that is our answer for question number 1. Now, this is the second part. How forest vegetation is abating pollutants. Now, as we said, forests are not only lungs of ecosystems, they are also livers. Livers are purifying agents. In that context, we are using livers. Okay. Plants are often seen as lungs of ecosystem, but they also act as liver too, filtering atmospheric pollutants like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide through their leaves. Further, trees are particularly effective at removing particulate matter. So basically, the forest trees or trees of these plants, they are very effective filtering agents. That's how vegetations are abating pollutants. They are now we are talking about different kinds of pollutants. This is about air pollutants. We have talked about soil pollutants and water pollutants as well. So for air pollutants, they are physical barrier. Basically, air pollutants cannot go long. Then they settle the dust. They have capacity to assimilate pollutants like NO2. They are filtering out pollutants like SO2. So that's, we are just using them as examples. Soil pollutants, they absorb and filter them similarly, stabilizes pollutants and prevents from leaching. Then heavy metal poisoning. This is one of the very unique ability of forest or trees to absorb these heavy metals and store them without harming themselves. So they have mechanisms for metal uptake, accumulation, osmoregulation and translocation. So they have specialized glands which can store them away. And this is one of the very effective ways by forest and trees to control pollutants. And water pollutants, similarly, it reduces speed, it absorbs water pollutants, heavy metals and prevents leaching, filters water. Yeah, I mean, same stuff. This is question number 2. This is how it is happening. Question is how, not why or anything else. So you have to tell about mechanisms. Okay. Air Act description. This is very easy. Not a lot to explain here. I have written about backdrop of this air acts, a lot of acts which were enacted there. So basically, Stockholm Conference, which happened in 1972, it called for enactment of many of these legislations, and in that context, Water Act, Air Act, etc., were enacted by Government of India, or rather Parliament of India, under Article 253. So, and salient feature in terms of pollution, air pollution control, you can mention Act is for prevention, control, etc. And it establishes boards and gives them responsibility to do that. The Act defines air pollutants, Act defines air pollution. You can look at the definitions. I've just taken them from the uh, Act itself. They establish central and state board and declares them they are same as Central Pollution Control Board and State Pollution Control Boards, which are established under Water Act of 1974. They are same. You can look at the definitions, you can look at the powers of CPCB and SPCBs. Mm, these boards, powers of these boards, so they can issue direction, they can declare closure of industries on inspection, and they can declare that stoppage of water and electricity. They can impose penalties, imprisonments, etc. That is also mentioned here. And now this is the important part which we may not know in detail about. What are the important species, or what are the most effective species for pollution control? Okay. Now, this is an introduction kind of thing for this subpart. So, some species are more effective in filtering out pollutants from air or water than others. Thus, choice of right species is important, and the right species may differ from place to place. Now, because pine is very effective, you cannot start planting pine in, let's say, a South Indian forest or tropical forest. That is not how it will happen. Or even in cities like Delhi, pines will not grow that effectively. Now, filtering activity by plant depends mostly on or either canopy size. Bigger the canopy, better the filtration, because it will have more leaves, it will stop more air in its path, it will stop more water in its path, it has more filtering power. One, canopy size. Second, leaf size. Bigger the leaf, more the ability to absorb and act as filter. And structure. So, hairy leaves or broad leaves or rugged rough leaves, they are better. That is why pine etc. are better for that, for filtering out pollutants. Now, examples, which are the trees? So, deciduous trees, Dalbergia latifolia or Dalbergia sisu, Albizia lebec. As I have said, please write scientific names. It gives very positive uh, uh, impact to your answering. And semi-deciduous trees like neem, Azadirachta indica, CDM guava tree. Evergreen trees like cassia, banyan, which is Ficus bengalensis, and eucalyptus. I have written eucalyptus citriodera. You can write eucalyptus globalis or grandis, etc. Then Pinus roxburghi, cypresses, quercus species are very effective because they are good natural purifiers, because they have dense canopy and needle-like leaves typical of conifers. That is effective in trapping pollutants and filtering them out. So, cheer, cypress, quercus, you can write. Again, toxic heavy metals, as we have talked about, some trees are quite effective in filtering them out. So, there are Azadirachta indica, Adansonia digitata. So, African baobab. You may have seen their photos. If you have not, please Google it. It's very unique looking tree. We can find that in Africa and uh, our Arabian Peninsula as well. They should be planted on contaminated sites such as mechanic sites to detoxify pollutants. So, one way is to write all these things, but if you don't have this space, you can just enlist these species and club them, right? Like I have clubbed them. So, you can write about the deciduous trees, write Dalbergia latifolia, Dalbergia sisu, Albizia lebec, and uh, write this and write in front of them deciduous trees. Similarly, for these trees, more, I mean, I think you can mention 5 to 7 trees and that should be enough. But different kinds of trees you should mention. Don't just mention only one kind of trees, like whatever you know. So, cheer trees, that you can mention because they have needle like leaves and they are natural purifier, that you can mention. And lead contamination by toxic heavy metals, these species you can especially mention, Azadirachta indica and Adansonia digitata. Okay. Mm, Next question. Again, a conceptual question. This is question on spring shed. How do you differentiate spring shed from watershed? 1. Explain how healthy spring shed can ensure better hydrological cycle of an area. Again, 15 marker. Good question. Tests your conceptual clarity about spring shed and watershed. Hope you know what they mean. And because the question is about spring shed, I have started the question and introduced it with the definition of spring. Okay, you can do it by defining spring shed and watershed, but I have used that as one of the points in my differentiating tables. Okay. Now, what is a spring? In mountainous region, groundwater naturally discharges in the form of spring, which occur where a water-bearing layer or aquifer intersects with hill slope and groundwater. Springs are basically overflowing aquifers. Okay. So, in this figure, you can see what spring shed and watershed mean. If these are hills and valley system, like in, let's say, Himalayas, so this is recharge area, this is aquifer or a spring shed rather, what is watershed? Watershed is an area where entire water that flows on that uh, unit drains at a common point. That is what watershed is. So basically, if water is flowing through here, it will drain here. Water is flowing anywhere on this slope, on this valley slope, it will drain at the bottom point. But if the water is flowing here, it cannot drain at here, this point. It will drain this side. So that is what, this is a single watershed. This is watershed 1, this is watershed 2, 3, 4. Okay. But spring shed is a different area. Spring shed is rather about aquifers. So in this spring shed, wherever the spring may occur, it will derive its water from this common aquifer. This is what spring shed is. It will any water that is falling on this area will ultimately lead to this spring shed or this aquifer rather. So this is a one spring shed and this is another spring shed. I hope I am clear. Any spring that is flowing will derive its water from this aquifer, and any water that is flowing that is falling on this area will ultimately lead to this common aquifer. This is what spring sheds properties are. This is what spring sheds are defined as. If you draw this diagram, great. I have drawn here to, I have just put it here to explain. And difference, I have written it in terms of table. If you want to write difference, this is the most effective way, as you know. What is watershed? What is spring shed? First is meaning. Watershed is, as I have said, it's a geohydrological unit wherein any water that is flowing will drain to a common point. That is, it is what defines watershed. Any water flowing on it drains at a common point. But spring shed, it is unit of land wherein rainfall or recharge area and then emerges at discharge point of a spring. So this is defined more from recharge area or aquifer level than surface water flowing level. Then unit, it is a natural unit for management of watershed, but this is natural unit for revival and management of spring. Of course, what are its constituents? Basically, common set of streams, rivers that drain into a single larger body of water. This common point that we are talking about, it is generally a river or a lake or a common bigger source of water. That's where all the streams or water flowing on the watershed ultimately drains. That is what constitutes watershed. But in spring shed, it is a relationship between spring, aquifer system below the spring, and the watershed above the spring shed or above the aquifer. It entirely relationship between all these constituents is what defines spring shed. So you can already see that this is a wider concepts or aquifer level concepts. Extent, as we have seen, watershed, one valley will have one watershed, generally restricted to valley where streams flow as surface water. Two different valleys will have separate watershed, but not necessarily same as inhabited by spring. Spring and its spring shed can be there in two different valleys, because spring shed is defined more from aquifer point of view. So one aquifer can be there in two valleys or multiple valleys. Okay, that's there, and we can see that in Himalayas as examples. Focus is more on water flowing on the surface, and it is focused more on aquifers and underground water bearing layer, which is what aquifer is. I hope that is clear. You can take note of it, you can take screenshot or watch it once again. If there is any doubt, you can ask. Now the second part of the question: how does healthy spring shed lead to better management of hydrological cycle of an area? So firstly, again, for this part, we define what hydrological cycle is. Hydrological cycle is basically circulation of water between earth and atmosphere. And we have already seen what a water cycle looks like. This is the same thing. Hydrological cycles involve continuous circulation of water in earth atmosphere system. You can draw the similar kind of diagram here if you have space and time. But if not, this one sentence is enough, because question is not asking about not about hydrological cycle, but how healthy spring shade helps maintaining hydrological cycle. Now, for that, firstly, I think we should know what healthy spring shade means. If we know that, we can write it in a better way. Healthy spring shade means at aquifer level, spring sources are healthy. So sources are healthy. They have aquifers have adequate quantity and quality of water, and thus keeping healthy spring shade can help us in better hydrological cycles in following way. What is the way? This is again a very logical point. It can ensure that water availability at the source and ecological flow is maintained because this is source of springs and rivers in the area. So if at aquifer level there is enough quantity of water, there will be enough quantity at spring and river level. So ecological flow will be maintained. Again, when ecological flow is maintained, that is natural cleaning system of river. So we will have better quality of river because there is natural self-cleaning ability by streams. It can ensure adequate water availability of local springs and streams that may originate nearby. Then when spring shade is healthy, adequate availability of moisture is there, and it will lead to adequate moisture ascending currents, which will lead to adequate local rainfalls, which will lead to healthy water cycle. Further, it will sustain functioning forests in the nearby area, thus enabling forests to perform their role in hydrological cycle, which we have already discussed, which you can mention here as well as discussed in question number 6A, I think. I think that is enough because you already had to write a lot in terms of spring and spring shade differentiation. So I think that is enough. If you can think of any more point, do mention. Again, a standard question, similar question was there in GK paper as well, which we have already discussed. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of tree breeding methods over biotechnological methods? It's a 10 marker, so not a lot of time to write, but simple two-part question, advantages and disadvantages, simple. Firstly, in introduction, yes, we will define what is tree breeding. Tree breeding methods will include mating of two different species or variants or breeds of tree and that do not usually cross naturally. So it is generally done by cross pollination and is used to mate two, okay, sorry, spelling mistake is there, two genetically related trees that may not naturally cross. So basically in tree breeding, breeding is done in genetically similar trees. You can't just jump between families and genera that easily. That is the again one of the limitations of tree breeding. So in tree breeding, we are doing it by cross pollination. And on the other hand, biotechnology methods include alteration of genetic material of tree using genetic engineering at individual level. We are just improving, changing genetic material of the individual itself as and when we want it. Now, what are the advantages over biotechnology? So basically, it has no environmental concerns because we are just cross pollinating. We are not harming or changing genetic material at individual level at very precise in a very precise way. So there are no environmental concerns like harm to biodiversity. On the other hand, we are improving biodiversity. In genetic engineering, there is transfer of selected gene in other species. What may benefit one plant, it can harm another plant. So in genetic engineering, you don't know beforehand. But in tree breeding, there is no question of that way because we are anyway dealing with genetically similar species. Ethical question, there is no ethical question regarding interference with nature in tree breeding. Biotechnologically bred trees and crops are often more expensive because see only these big companies have like Monsanto have this kind of technologies to effectively uh, do R&D in GM crops and produce it as mass level. So poorer countries may not always uh, afford them. They could be harmful toxins they produce have been detected in some people's blood. They can cause allergic reaction pollen produced can be toxic, etc. But what are disadvantages? See, in reality, these advantages are less, but disadvantages are more, because genetic engineering is much less costly when you look at it from R&D perspective as well, and it takes, because with advent of CRISPR technology, it is very easy to manipulate genetic material of any species really. It is very quick, it is impact result is very easily and quickly visible. In here, uh, tree breeding experiments are very costly, they take generations and multiple rotations, it takes lot of time, it takes lot of area, because you have to produce isolation zones for R&D, you have to carefully pollinate them, you have to hire expert staff and all. Then precision over outcome is not there in tree breeding. In crisp in genetic engineering, there is absolutely precision in terms of outcome of species or outcome of this breeding is engineering. Then there is no need in genetic engineering to cross for multiple generations to get desired trait. You can just directly manipulate gene. But in tree breeding, you have to see, to get desired trait, you have to do multiple exercises for multiple generations, which may take years and years. May have other weaknesses like infertility. So tree breeding, it is often seen that infertility in plants may arise. Okay. This is again, I thought, was a difficult question. One second. Give overview of forest genetic resources and gene conservation programs in India. Suggest effective practices for that. Okay, suggest effective practices for sustainable management of Indian forest. So this is an easy question, part 3. Give overview of forest genetic resources and gene conservation. This is again moderately difficult, but this question I think is difficult because you don't know what to write and how to write about it. What are forest genetic resources? You need to have conceptual clarity as well, and you need to know what some kind of data as well, and effective practice. This is easy question. So let's see how I think we can go about it. Firstly, you have to define what forest genetic resources are. These are the heritable materials within and among the tree species and other woody plants. Basically, this is the genetic resources within the forest. This is the heritable material. This is what trees and forest can pass on to next generation, and to that extent. So this is FGR, what we are saying, forest genetic resources. And in India, you have to give overview of these resources in India. So basically, India is one of the mega diverse countries in the world. Okay. So, oh sorry. One of the 12 mega diverse countries of the world, which together possess 60 to 70% of world biodiversity. Then we are endowed with great genetic diversity. It accounts for 7 to 8% of all the recorded species, including over 45,000 plant species. So you can see this extent of genetic resources that are there in India. India has diverse types of forest. We have 16 groups of forest according to Champion and State classification. So thereby high genetic diversity is already there between species and within species as well. For instance, we have teak in South India, sal in North India. So there are different species that are there. In even within teak, there is white teak, there is uh, like Melina arborea is there, this Tectona grandis is there, and there are a lot of other teak species as well. And this is again one of the examples is brinjal species. It has more than 3,000 varieties in India. And because I remember that because that is one of the criticisms of BT brinjal, because we may lose these kind of the biodiversity within brinjal. And many of these varieties are of course of forest origin. I think that is enough. I mean, if you can think of many more points of this overview, you can comment in comment section, but this question is much more easy to handle because there are a lot of gene conservation programs that are going in India. I have enlisted some of them. There is at organizational level, there is National Bureau of Plant Genetic Resources, then there is National Bureau of Forest Genetic Resources. It has been accepted in principle. Then this is more important for the particular question and here, because this has been there under genetic resources program with wide variety of network of regional institutes situated at various agroecological zones for germplasm collection, ex situ and in situ conservation, as well as introduction and evaluation of new species. So you see, this is the main program for conservation of our forest genetic resources. Then gene banks have been set up by DBT. Then biosphere reserves and national parks are there for in situ and ex situ conservation. State forest departments are working. You can give numbers also. There are 104 national parks, 551 sanctuaries, and 18 biosphere reserves. Then conservation of wetland program is going on since 1987. India is signatory to this Ramsar Convention on international wetlands of international importance. Then state forest departments have established 54 forest gene banks called medicinal plant conservation areas as well. So this data I have picked up from the internet, but this is what answer demands. If you don't know the data, at least know the plans and programs, and you can mention organizations and acts, etc. at least. Gene banks harbor 45% of the recorded population. So this all is okay. Medicinal plants boards are there. Then this Laconas was the recent dedicated facility of CSIR for cellular and molecular biology for conservation of endangered wildlife, which will include forest genetic resources, of course. Then Biological Diversity Act, there will be biodiversity boards, then local boards will be there, which will record all the biodiversity in the local area, at district level, and at the state and national level as well. Now the third question of it, what are the practices for sustainable management? What could be the practices? Yeah, proper monitoring should be there of forest, stopping of illegal felling, miling, encroachment, locals in governance that we have already done in JFM, awareness, training, employment, forest fire control, shifting cultivation control, invasive species, pollution control, ecotourism should be there, etc. Again, very good question, I would say. Not very difficult, but not very easy to write exactly. Okay. How does crop rotation and mixed farming improve soil productivity? So there are two questions here. How does crop rotation improve soil productivity, and how does mixed farming improve soil productivity? So you need to know both, because this is a 15 marker again. Question may seem so short, but you have again 4 pages to write, 2 pages for each thing. So you have lot of things to write, or rather you should, because there is and 15 marker question, and question asks how does it happen. Okay, in GS or GK papers, you will just write in one of the benefits of mixed or crop farming that it will lead to soil productivity increase, but here you have to explain how will that happen. Now let's come to question number first part of it, rather. What is crop rotation? Crop rotation is simply system of growing different kinds of crops in recurrent succession on the same land. On the same land, if we are growing one crop after different crops after one after another. So instead of just growing rice, we grow different crops in rotation here. So crop rotation is there. Now, how does it help in soil productivity increase? Basically, it will maintain soil organic matter. We have already seen how soil organic matter is important for soil productivity and nutrient availability as well. So basically what happens is, when you take crops residue will remain and it will lead to soil organic matter. We have already seen the active component, so it will come from crop residues. So if different kinds of crop residue comes in, it will lead to more nutrients or different kinds of nutrients getting in the soil. cycling among crops with different nutrient needs. So each crop comes with its own nutrient needs. If you take only one crop, it will exploit only particular kinds of nutrient needs, while other nutrients remain unexplored. But this kinds one kind of nutrients get exploited more and more and more. It will lead to soil losing its productivity. But if you take different crops, it will have different nutrient needs. That is why you will have more productive soil. Cover crops, you can use adding organic soil amendments. That can happen in with if you take different crops. Further, most crops deplete soil nutrients during their growth cycle. Some of these nutrients leave farm as harvested products, but rest return as crop residue. Basically, we are explaining whatever points we have wrote above. These nutrients residues may or may not be available for the next cycle crop. Crop roots and residue improve soil fertility by stimulating soil microbial communities and improving soil aggregation. Soil aggregation is basically, see, when there is a soil, some soil particles they are bound together much stronger than some other particles. So when one group of soil particles is bound and another group is aggregated differently, the aeration is created. See, and that is how it helps in soil productivity. So these improve soil aggregation and thereby improving soil physical environment as well. So water filtration will be better, water holding capacity will improve, aeration will be better, and ultimately growth of plants and nutrient foraging. Okay, 1 second. Now, what happens is in crop rotation, one rotation is taken for leguminous crops. So they will add nitrogen as well because they have rhizobium species in their root nodules. They will convert atmospheric nitrogen into plant available nitrogen. So these are the benefits of crop cross crop rotation. Now the question number 2, mixed farming. What is mixed farming? Mixed farming is basically farming together with animal rearing or raising of livestock. How it improves soil productivity? It is easy. See, when you have livestock with you, you need to have some kind of pasture for them. You cannot have just you cannot use all your land for crops. And when we have system wherein both crops and pastures are there, it has been seen that it will be having better. It will be better in building soil carbon compared to continuous cropping operation. And soil carbon is extremely important for soil productivity. As you might know, soil has more carbons or at least 3 times more carbon than atmosphere, and at least 5 times more carbon than forests and all the animals and plants, etc. combined. So soil is one of the biggest holders of carbon, and maintenance of that soil carbon is crucial for soil productivity. And mixed farm that has some pasture in it is better at it. Okay. Another thing is growing crops only on more level land and pasture or foragers on steeper slope will lead to reducing soil erosion. So if your farm is something like this, you take crops here, you build pastures here. It will lead to reducing soil erosion because water that will flow, its space will get reduced. Right. Pastures and leguminous forage crops in rotation enhance soil quality and reduce erosion. Same thing, leguminous crop we have to take as a feed stock for livestock. Livestock manure, of course, it will lead to soil fertility. You can use them as fertilizers. Further, this is again indirect point, but with additional income, there is no need to exploit farmland with chemical fertilizers or pesticides, and you can keep land fallow or do crop rotation instead of continually taking cash crops or water intensive crops. So instead of taking rice, wheat, rice, wheat, rice, wheat, you can keep land fallow, or you can take some other crops so as to maintain soil productivity if you have additional income from livestock farming as well. That is again another indirect benefit of mixed farming. Now, I think this is the last question of this paper. Okay. Discuss the role of tree domestication in biodiversity conservation. Simple. Introduction is basically what is tree domestication. Again, this is not a simple question, but if you know the concept of tree domestication, it becomes easy. Tree domestication is evolutionary process whereby a population of plants become accustomed to human provision and control. So, like you domesticate animals, like dogs, we have domesticated them over generations and generations, and now evolution of dogs and humans have become has been a side by side thing. So now dogs are completely domesticated uh, animals, right? That is evolutionary process of dogs. Similarly, for plants, it has to be a evolutionary process wherein population of plant becomes accustomed to humans when in terms of its provision and control. It includes genetic changes involved in bringing plant into cultivation and in its development and planted resource. So both unconscious and deliberate selection and breeding to adapt them to meet human needs. So we want to adapt plants to meet them human needs. We do it by conscious or deliberate uh, breeding, and plants thereby change their genetic makeup as a part of natural selection process as well. This is explanation. This is a 10 marker. You don't have to write all this. I've just mentioned here. And tree domestication is usually done by local communities for their dietary purposes, for cultural purposes, or medicinal purposes as well. Right. In this slide, tree domestication can perform crucial role in biodiversity conservation. This is our connecting statement. So how does it do it? We can identify species to be domesticated. Rare and threatened species can be conserved if domesticated for, say, medicinal or cultural benefits. Now, again, this is data I have picked up from one research paper. So more than 100, I think there was this article in Down to Earth, you can read about it. More than 100 tree species of high economic importance have become threatened and critically endangered in Western Ghats. The name is this Syzygium travancorum. It's an economically important tree. It is again reduced to population size of 15 to 20 individuals. It cannot sustain them due to now what happens when only these kind of small populations remain. There is lot of inbreeding and infertility that creeps in. Diseases that become apparent. Recessive genes become a norm. So this is where domestication can help in in producing more and increasing genetic variability, because in domestication genetic changes are norm. We have seen that genetic changes will happen. Similarly, Dapterocarpus bordellioni, another endangered species, has 14 individuals in Kodagu district. Again, example only. Since tree species requires decades for regeneration of optimum population, if there is lack of regeneration or habitat, their present population cannot be considered healthy, and where domestication can help. Increase in breeding, limited pollen and seed dispersal flow caused by fragmentation of population and impact of region. Basically, what we are saying that there are these problems because there is lot of inbreeding, there is habitat destruction, there is limited pollens and seed dispersal, their flow has been fragmented. Um, so these problems, regeneration takes a lot of time to optimum population. So these problems can be solved or not solved. Domestication can help in resolving some of those issues. So tree domestication can thus protect and enhance biodiversity, thereby conserving it. That was the last question. And I think this paper was little bit more difficult, or this section was bit more difficult than section A. At least I felt so. Let me know what you think, and any constructive criticism is welcome. Thank you.